Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Jesus Podcast, a podcast for everyday Christians seeking to follow Jesus every day. I am your host, Brian Boswell. Just a reminder, join our club. I want to give a big shout out to those who've already joined, but we're looking for a few more club members to help us cover the cost of running this podcast. It costs just $5 a month, so please go to our website, everydayjesus.net, and help us out. We have got a great show in store for you today. First off, we are going to answer the question, why should I go to church? Then, in our good news segment, we look at an article about a couple of Kentucky students who repurposed a box van into a food truck to help feed the hungry and the homeless in their community. Our Unreached People Group is the Vanniyan of India. And in today's word, we look at John 10, where Jesus talks about being the good shepherd. So why should I go to church? This question is one of the more popular questions in our generation. It seems that mainstream Christianity is shrinking throughout the United States and elsewhere in the world. Although some countries, such as Africa and China, they're seeing phenomenal growth, in our modern world, the trend for church attendance seems to be headed down. There are many organizations looking for reasons as to why this is happening. Some would say that our mega church, entertainment-driven philosophy has pushed many people away. Now, others would say that the conservative morals on issues like abortion and same-sex marriage are the reason that many have decided to call it quits on the church. Personally, I'm leaning towards the supply and demand problem. Now, before I explain that, let me first lay some groundwork. First off, in the church, we have elevated the weekly service to be the top priority in our Christian subculture. And in this weekly worship service, the two items presented as the top priorities are the sermon and the music. If you attend almost any church in America on Sunday, you will find those two items, without fail. The sermon for many churches is the most important part of their meeting. For other churches, it's the worship, meaning the music. Wow, that music really moved me today. These two items for years have been pushed as the two main ingredients for a church. If you were to start a church today, you would look for someone who could, number one, deliver a sermon, and then someone else who could lead the singing. And voila, you have yourself a church. Now, I'm not going to talk down either of those two items. I'm a believer that those two items are very important. I think they're needed. But the problem lies in the fact of supply and demand. Because of the internet, we live in a world in which you can listen to the very best sermons in the world at any time of the day. You can hear from the greatest preachers in our generation and sometimes on previous generations on a weekly basis. If you go to YouTube right now, you can look up all of John Piper's sermons. If you go to any type of podcast, they have there are tons of sermon podcasts online available for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And for music, it's not any different. For music, you can load up your phone with all of the greatest worship bands available. And it can totally be your taste. So if you like Southern gospel, it's there. Or if you're more of a Bethel or Hillsong person, no problem. Maybe you prefer harder rock for worship. There's bands that do that too. You don't need to leave your house to get both a sermon and a song. So what's the point in going to church? If all church is music and preaching, then why go? And that's what a lot of people are asking themselves. Why waste a Sunday morning by driving into town, fighting with the kids, and so on, when I can just lay here in bed, click on the YouTube app, and I can have church right here? And I believe that those are important questions that deserve to be answered. You see, the church has focused on these two aspects of worship for so long that I think it's understandable for people to be confused on this subject. For churches and church leaders, we need to not only be able to answer this question, but we need to find ways to fix the issues that lead to this misunderstanding. So let's look at what the Bible says about the early church to get a baseline for what they valued. Acts chapter 2, verse 42 says this, "And they," meaning the Christians of that time, "devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and prayers." Now here we see 4 different items mentioned for what the early church valued: teaching, fellowship, eating together, and praying. Now, the context of this passage tells us that these things were things that they did together. Now, even the prayers that were mentioned, the context informs us that these prayers, they were a part of corporate worship. It wasn't just talking about praying in your prayer closet at home, but it was talking about praying together as a part of corporate worship. Now let's look at another verse that talks about us meeting together. This one is found in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 24 to 25. "And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." Now, these verses here, they highlight our need for fellowship, because it is the way that we stir one another up. We stir one another up to love and good works when we are together. And the encouragement in this passage is that as we get closer to the end of the age, what it calls the day, as we get closer to that day drawing near, then we should be meeting together all the more. So why should you go to church? Well, the easy answer is that's where we would be spending time together. But to get a little deeper, let's look closely at 4 priorities from chapter 2 of the book of Acts that the early church had, and let's see how they apply today. So number 1 was mentioned, the apostles' teaching. In the early church, the best way to learn about Jesus was to sit under the feet of the apostles and to hear firsthand accounts of the life of Jesus and to have them explain the importance of his coming and his death. This teaching has been the foundation for churches ever since. Now, in our modern times, people are way too busy and they seldom take time to learn about Jesus. I'm talking about Christians here. We do not take time to learn about Jesus. We don't take time to read our Bibles. The Sunday sermon was developed as a form of discipleship in many instances. People come to church to hear from the pastor and to be discipled through the sermon. Now, I'm going to submit to you that that's not enough. Churches have gotten away from doing Bible studies, and the biblical literacy rate in America is dropping. I mean, it is falling fast. And we need to reinstitute Bible studies in our churches. If we're going to say that this is an important value for the early church, and therefore it should be an important value to us, then we need to take it seriously. We need to read our Bibles, and we need to have Bible studies in our churches, period. Number 2, fellowship. Fellowship is the act of spending time with other Christians. In our virtual world that we have now, the internet, the social media, all of that stuff, there is one thing that can't be replicated on the internet. It's fellowship. Sure, you can instant message people and chat over the web, but being in person with other believers forms a tighter bond than any type of internet friendship. Fellowship builds trust and community. Now, the early church clearly trusted each other, and they knew each other deeply. When you spend time together, you learn about other people's needs. You find ways to creatively meet those needs. You see that throughout the book of Acts. You constantly see people trying to find ways to meet the needs of those apostles or the widows. It's done through fellowship. If we want to be faithful to Jesus, we will spend time with his bride. That's the bottom line. Fellowship is utmost importance. The church needs to reevaluate how it presents fellowship to the world. Number 3, breaking bread together. The third priority in the early church was listed as breaking bread. Now, some people, and I think rightfully so, interpret this to mean the Lord's Supper. Now, I do believe that this verse can be interpreted to mean that. I think the early church celebrated the Lord's Supper together. I fully believe that. But I also think that this verse is more than just that. I think the new believers and disciples spent time together over meals. While fellowshipping at a church building is important, this to me is more intimate. So a lot of churches have potluck dinners. I'm not really talking about that. I think those are fine. There's nothing wrong with those. But what I'm talking about is getting together in one another's homes and eating at their table, sharing their food. This builds deep bonds between believers. Sharing food is a basic staple of a healthy community. Remember, the church isn't just a building, it's a people. And we need to realize that we should be doing church more than just on Sunday morning. It should be a everyday occurrence. So number 1, the apostles' teaching. Number 2, fellowship. Number 3, breaking bread together. Number 4, praying together. The last item on the list was prayer. And as I mentioned earlier, this isn't talking about private prayer. This is talking about corporate prayer. And this is one of the areas where I think churches just struggle. Churches are afraid of long periods of corporate prayer. People might get bored. People might leave and find a more entertaining church. Man, that's baloney. Fervent prayer connects us directly to God. Prayer should be one of the major highlights to a Sunday service. It shouldn't be dry. It shouldn't be dead. One of the reasons why prayer is dry is because people doing the praying don't actually believe that they are talking to God. They don't believe that they have a direct line of communication with God the Father, the ruler of this universe. He's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And if we truly believe those things, and we believe that prayer, we're talking to God, in prayer we are talking to Him, then we would take it more seriously. It would be the focal point of our time together. Why? Because that's how we connect to the Father. So those are the 4 points. So if you've ever wondered why you should go to church, those are 4 good reasons. Only through church can you be properly discipled under the apostles' teaching. Only through church can you fellowship with other believers. Only through church can you break bread together. And only through church can you pray together as a body. Those 4 items were the top priorities in the early church, and they should be top priorities for us today. Next up is today's good news. Today's good news comes from cbnnews.com. The author of the article is Talia Wise. It's entitled, Kentucky Students Open Food Truck to Serve City's Hungry and Homeless Youth. Two students in Ashland, Kentucky are tackling food hunger head on this summer by opening a food truck to serve the county's hungry and homeless students, the article reads. Gavin Couture and Cassie Stevens are hoping to serve more than 15,000 students this summer on their newly renovated food truck. That's awesome. I mean, that's really cool. So here's what's happening in this article. You've got two students who recognize a need in their community. They recognize the need, and then they do something about it. The article continues. The pair serve on Paul G. Blazer High School's Student Senate and learned that a number of their peers in Ashland Independent School District don't have a permanent address, and even more, they rely on free or reduced cost breakfasts and lunches. This is way bigger than I thought. It made me start thinking we need to spread awareness to other people who are like me that know there is something wrong, but not how big of a problem it actually is, Stevens told CBN News. Couture and Stevens realized that although various programs help feed the students during the week, on the weekend and during school breaks, their classmates did not have consistent meals. They came up with the idea to renovate the district's existing box truck into a fully functioning food truck in order to deliver hot, fresh meals on days when school is not in session. Kelly Heischman, a first-year teacher at Paul G. Blazer High School, encouraged the Student Senate to put their food truck idea into action by applying for a community challenge grant. One of our biggest goals this year was to share with people how vast the problem is and how many students experience food insecurity, she said. The Ashland Independent School District won the $10,000 grant in early April and have since remodeled the truck. Stevens told CBN News they were simply inspired to take the district's current feeding program to the next level. When the summer feed program was first started, they were serving 7,000 students. Then they started using the box truck just to deliver food, and it jumped to 15,000. We hope by turning it into an actual food truck that we can make that number jump a couple more thousand. Couture said that they are hoping to use the food truck as a platform to bring awareness to the hunger crisis in their city. One way we have thought of doing that is allowing different clubs that we have at school to volunteer as part of the food truck crew, he told CBN News. Couture and Stevens said they plan to serve lunches out of the truck each day over the summer. So here's the article. It's just a wonderful article about two students. And you know what I love is this is something that can be replicated wherever you are. So if you are a high school student, you're listening to this podcast, or maybe you're someone that's connected with people, you could do this. Every district, every school district, whether it's the county school system that you're in, Mecklenburg County Schools, Wake County Schools, all of those districts, there are tons of children that are homeless. They don't have options for food. They literally go without on days where they don't go to school. This is a way, just a creative solution to a problem. And as Christians, we should always be looking for creative solutions to whatever problems there are in society. We should be looking for those solutions. Just a kudos to Gavin Couture and Cassie Stevens for seeing a need, and for their teacher, Kelly Heischman, for encouraging them to follow up on that need and to get something done about it. That's truly a good news article. Next up is our Unreached People Group. This week's Unreached People Group is the Vanniyan of India. The Vanniyan are around 11 million people strong, most of them in southern India. Their religion is Hinduism, and there's about 1.4% of their population that are listed as Christ followers. The term Vanniyars and the Padayachi have been used interchangeably because of the same historical origin they claim. The Vanniyars are descendants from the medieval Paluva kings who ruled Andhra and northern Tamil Nadu, with their capital at Kanchipuram. Vanniyars have minor differences as the Padachi is a class within the Vanniar caste. Where are they located? Most Vanniars in India are in the 3 adjacent southern states of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and Andhra Pradesh, mostly concentrated in the area where these 3 states intersect. Among the lower caste in the Tamil Nadu, they are the most populous, and they are one of the very earliest castes to be socially well organized. Today, they are the most politically mobilized and well-informed caste in the Tamil Nadu. The overwhelming majority of Vanniars are Hindu. Rather than believing in one god, they believe in a multitude of gods. Hinduism is sometimes described as a conglomeration of distinct intellectual and philosophical points of view rather than a rigid common set of beliefs. Prayer items. We need to pray that God will raise up prayer teams to break up the soil through worship and intercession. We need to ask the Lord to call people who are willing to go to India and share Christ with the Vanniyan. And we need to ask the Holy Spirit to soften their hearts towards Christians so that they will be receptive to the gospel. So this week, let's remember the Vanniyan of India in our prayers. Next up is today's word. Today's word comes to us from John chapter 10. We're going to read verses 1 through 21. Hear now the words of God. Very truly, I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said again, Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as my Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. The Jews who heard these words were again divided. Many of them said, He is a demon-possessed and raving mad. Why listen to him? But others said, These are not the sayings of a man possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? Lord, bless the reading of your word. So here we are. We've got this continuing narrative in the book of John. If you remember chapter 9, Jesus heals the blind man. He has a conversation with the Pharisees because he healed the blind man on the Sabbath. And here he is. He's continuing to speak to the Pharisees. And he says to the Pharisees, Anyone who does not enter by the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. And the way we could look at it in today's terms is, if you come into my house and you don't go through the front door, you're a thief or a robber. I mean, because if you're going to come into the house, you're going to go in through the front door. You're not going to come in the back window. You're not going to come in through the upstairs window. You're not going to cut a hole in the attic. You're going to come in the proper way. And the one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. So Jesus is drawing a distinction here. You got this idea of a thief or a robber, and then you've got the idea of the shepherd. The gatekeeper, he opens the gate for the shepherd. The sheep listen to his voice. This is a common theme with Jesus as far as hearing the voice of the shepherd. Sheep follow the shepherd by hearing his voice. They don't follow someone else's voice. They know the shepherd's voice. You got to hear this because it's super important. Christ says that he is that good shepherd. We are his sheep. So what does that imply to us? It implies that we need to know the voice of the shepherd. Why? Because if we don't, we may be following the thief or the robber. If we don't know the shepherd's voice, we're in big trouble. Why? Because he calls his own sheep by name. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. I want you to know that God knows your name. He calls you by name. If you are a Christian today, Jesus knows your name. He knows who you are. And here's the better promise there, that he calls you, he leads you out. Out of what? Out of any type of bad circumstance or situation that you might find yourself in, out of your sinful life. He leads you out of that. He is the good shepherd. And we hear his voice. That's why we follow him. When we hear the bridegroom calling out to his bride, we follow after him. When we hear the good shepherd calling out to the sheep follow his voice. Verse 5 says, "But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice." So don't be worried. You know, I've heard a lot of people, and there's a lot of people who don't believe that God continually speaks to his children, but Jesus put a lot of discussion out there about this topic. And this is one of the biggest points in John 10, is he's talking about hearing his voice. And he says, don't worry about following a stranger's voice. You're not going to hear. If you hear a stranger's voice, you're going to run from it. You're going to run from it. He said, you will not follow the voice of a stranger. If you are a Christian, if you're following after Jesus, you're going to hear his voice. You're going to know his voice. You don't have to worry about following a stranger's voice, because you're not going to follow a stranger. Well, you're going to hear the stranger's voice. You're going to run away from the stranger. Now, Jesus used this as a figure of speech, and the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. That's a huge point. Jesus used this as a figure of speech. Why? He's relating to people how they should understand things. A lot of his disciples, they were shepherds. A lot of the people in the countryside, they knew shepherds. Shepherds was a common career. It was a common lifestyle, I guess I should say, in biblical times. Shepherds were out there. They were common people. He's talking about things that people understand. And here, the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Why? Because they didn't know him. They weren't part of his sheepfold. They weren't a part of his house. So they weren't following after him. As Christians, we follow our shepherd. So Jesus says to him again, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them." So think about what he's saying. There's been a lot of a false Christ. There's been some people who've come before me saying that, hey, I am the Messiah. He knows those were thieves and robbers. It was the enemy. And he says, but the sheep have not listened to them. Jesus knew that his people, they were not going to follow somebody else. They were going to follow him. They were going to follow after the words of God. Verse 9 says, I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. Jesus is the gate. What does that mean? It means that there's no way to the Father but through Jesus. In order to be saved, you have to go through Jesus. You can't go through Muhammad. You can't go through Hinduism. You're not going to get there via atheism by any other means. There's no way to enter into rest and into pasture, to enter into heaven without going through Jesus. It's just not going to happen. But whoever does enter in through Jesus, whoever walks through the gate, whoever repents and believes and puts their trust in Jesus, those are the ones that are going to be saved. Jesus promises that you'll come in and you'll go out. You'll be free. There's a freedom with being saved, and you're going to find pasture. What does that mean? You're finding rest. However, in verse 10, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. The thief, the enemy of the faith. He's come to steal, kill, and destroy. We have to be on high alert as Christians, looking for the enemy. But if we are following the Good Shepherd, if we are following Jesus, then we have nothing to fear. Jesus himself is our Good Shepherd. He will protect the flock. He will protect the sheep. He will lead the sheep and guide the sheep. We have nothing to fear. The enemy doesn't mean anything to us. We have nothing to worry about. But we need to be cognizant that there is an enemy. And he's out there. He's trying to get other unbelievers. He's trying to keep those unbelievers from entering into the gate. He wants them confused. He wants them entertained so that they don't give thought to these things. He wants to steal their life from them. And this is the opposite of what Jesus says at the end of verse 10. He says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. Or your translation may say, they may have abundant life, or life more abundant. Jesus comes to give us life. How? By saving us. He saves us and gives us life. It's through the one act, the death and resurrection from the cross to the grave, and then out of the grave, Jesus comes so that we might have life. We don't have to be afraid of death. We don't have to be afraid of anything. Jesus is here so that we can have life and have it to the full. And that's all we're going to touch on this week. We're going to finish up next week with verse 11, and we'll go through the end of this section because I think there's just still a whole lot more here that we could dwell on, that we can think on. Jesus has come. He has said that I am the gate. If you want to be saved today, if you're hearing my voice and you want to be saved, you got to enter in through the gate. You have to go through Jesus. Call out to him today. Ask for forgiveness of your sins. Repent of your sins, which means to turn away from them. Put your trust in Jesus as the author and the perfecter of your salvation. If you've done that, send me an email. I'd love to hear from you. feedback@everydayjesus.net. If you gave your life to Christ through this show, please share your testimony with us. Like and share our page on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. Leave a review on iTunes. 5-star ratings. Help us out. Share the word. Share this episode with somebody. Consider being a club member. We talked about it at the beginning of the show. It costs just $5 a month. We're just looking for help to cover the podcast hosting costs. And you can always visit our website at everydayjesus.net for free resources and content. I hope you have a very blessed week.